Hi, and welcome to week 3 of student engagement. This week, we're gonna get into pairing up partners. We're gonna discuss how you can pair up partners, how to help them start those conversations and what to talk about, as well as some helpful tips. Let's start by discussing ways that you can pair up students. So I like to pair students up in a variety of ways. I like to pick specific partners for them to work with during, let's say, math or literacy. Sometimes I might do that at the beginning of the year for students and give them a specific partner to work with. So some of those ways I might figure that out is by like ability or similar ability. That might mean if 2 students are performing pretty high, I might pair them with each other so they can have a pretty deep conversation. But when it comes to students who need more support, I might pair them with a student who can have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation and kind of support them in different sentence stems and how to talk versus 2 students who are really struggling, because those 2 students are gonna have a hard time figuring out what to talk about. So let's say we're having a math lesson about place value. I might say, okay, go to your math partner, and they know exactly who to pair up with and speak with. And I know that they're gonna be able to support each other and have the conversation that is at the level of depth that I'm looking for them to get to. Some other ways that you can pair up students, you can do random pairings. So we also have partner cards that students can use and pull. And so let's say they pick macaroni. Okay, they need to look for cheese. And so they might have a random partner for an activity that you're doing. You can also let them choose partners, give them the autonomy to choose. Okay, choose a partner who you're gonna have a good conversation with, or choose someone who's going to help you. So we're giving students the choices, and we have different flexible ways to group them no matter what we're doing. A question I get asked a lot is, how do you help students have the conversations that you want them to? And this takes a lot. So I've taught first grade for a long time. We spend a lot of time at the beginning of the year really working with partners, discussing what it looks like, what it sounds like, how we talk to our partners, what is active listening, and practice active listening. A really helpful way you can do this is so I always tell partners when they're talking that they need to have knees touching and eyes looking, ears listening. And so they know exactly what they're supposed to look like when they're talking to their partner. And then, okay, I want you to think about what your partner just said. How can you rephrase that for us? And teaching them what that means and how that's part of active listening. That takes a lot of help. But when you do that and spend the time explicitly practicing, then they're gonna get to the level of conversation that you want them to. But it takes time, it takes practice. And if you're just now gonna start pairing up students, start with easy topics. What did you do at home this weekend? What's your favorite animal? Get really simple with them. Give them practice topics, even give them practice sentences to go with. My favorite animal is blank, fill it in. Why? Because we're really guiding them through that because they don't know how to do it, especially those younger grades. They need the support. And if you give them the supports they need at the beginning, then they're gonna be really good at it when you get to the heavy stuff that you want them to get in depth about. Last week, we discussed that think, pair, share, and how I'm a huge fan of that because you're getting everyone's brains working in the room. You're giving everyone a voice in the room by having each person share with their partners. Then you're picking select students. And so some of the ways I do that, I want to avoid saying, raise your hand if you, instead, hey, Billy, can you share what your partner said? Or who can share something that their partner said? Or who can share something they agreed with their partner about. So it's part of that active listening. It's not just what are your thoughts, what are your partner's thoughts as well? And getting, again, everyone's voices in the room. Maybe there's a student who had a really good answer, but they're scared to share. Well, what can their partner share for them? This is, again, getting everyone's voices heard. Everyone's voice is important in this room. How do we get them all to share that? It's also really important to pre-plan out what your partners are gonna discuss and when. So again, let's go back to that example of our place value. Let's say we are learning about comparing numbers and we are going to discuss 2 sets of numbers, how we compare them, okay? Maybe we want them to think about it, then we want them to share with their partner, how would you compare those numbers? Walk us through it. Then it's time to share out. I'm going to already have decided at what point in my lesson I'm gonna have partners share as well as what they're going to talk about. And this is no matter what lesson. Maybe you're doing a read aloud. Again, pick out a point, tie it back into your standard. What do you want students to share about? What point in the lesson? I've had a lot of teachers reaching out to me about students blurting out, interrupting, just constantly talking over them. If you build in specific places for them to engage in the lesson, to share their thinking, there's gonna be less of that blurting, there's gonna be less of that interrupting. Again, it's creating that safe space for us all to learn us all to share. All of our voices are important, but it's also important to honor the voices of others too, and really building that in explicitly so that students know they need to participate. Their voice is important, as well as other people's, and how we model that and how we're respectful. And if you build in those explicit points throughout your lesson for students to engage and share their thinking, there's gonna be less interrupting and blurting overall. I've been talking with a lot of teachers lately who are really frustrated about the lack of respect, about students just talking constantly. And we have to remember the kids growing up today are growing up in a different time. They are thrown technology as soon as they're little. We know, we see it in restaurants, they're handed devices, in cars, in the grocery store, everywhere. And so they don't know how to interact, and they don't know when it's appropriate to share and when it's not. And so if we spend the time building in time for them to share, teaching them how to share appropriately, teaching them how to respect our environment in the classroom, these are how you're going to rein them back in and teach them, how do we interact with our peers? They aren't given a lot of time to interact with peers, so let's build in that time for them to do it and show them how to do it. And as we wrap up this week, I want to leave you with a couple things. One, make sure when you are building in discussion points to vary your question types. Again, maybe it's a what, maybe it's a why. Make sure that you are changing it up for them. And maybe there's no right answer. Help them with that too, because students really struggle with that. And it builds in a deeper discussion. I also want you to check out the blog post. It's all about more partner up pairing and tips. You'll really love it if you loved this week's episode. As well as make sure you tune in for next week's episode. It's the last one in this series. It's all about explicit modeling, as well as creating that positive learning environment for your students to thrive. Make sure you tell us in the comments, what did you take away from this, and what do you want to go into your classrooms and try tomorrow? This series has been all about creating easy and helpful tips to help make your classroom successful, as well as your students. So I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you tune in for next week's episode.